It is Wednesday, my dudes, which means it is time for another first thoughts and initial impressions video. This one will be on Sylvan Sage Vivian. If you remember from my first anniversary video, I talked about how Vivian is one of my favorite characters in the entire game, so I'm pretty excited to talk about this one. We will talk about whether or not I think the character is good. We'll go over her skills. We'll talk about, possible equipment builds that I might be considering on her. Do I think she's worth pulling? Artifacts? All of that stuff, my usual 2 cents will all be here. So with that out of the way, let's, as always, take a look at her S3 animation to start.
With the magic I've learned, I will rewrite the future. You shouldn't have come here. Now it's too late to escape. The majesty of nature, be humbled.
Sylvan Sage Vivian as well as Vivian are voiced by Kat Cressida in the English dub of Epic 7. She voices probably many of your favorite waifus in this game, including characters like Euphine as well as Falconer Clury. You can obviously learn more about her in How to Play Vivian as well as How to Play Holiday Euphine here on this channel. I also have to say I really like this character's design. If you remember from the first year anniversary video, I talked about how Vivian was, again, one of my favorite characters in Epic 7, and I really like the relationship between her and Coeric. It very much reminds me of Cloud and Tifa from Final Fantasy 7, which is my favorite game, and I do actually like the fact that Vivian has white hair here, because it's kind of like, for anyone who's follows the concept art for Final Fantasy VII, Tifa originally, as designed by Yoshitaka Amano, was a white-haired female before eventually being switched to a more natural, darker hair color. So I think that's a pretty cool thing. At least, in my head canon, this character is essentially Mage Tifa, so seeing her with the white hair, pretty sick. So now let's move on to the actual stats here. She is a light mage of the Cancer Zodiac symbol. We have talked about this symbol before in How to Play Milim. It is Red Tenebria as well as Milim stat line, and it's honestly pretty nuts for a mage in general. It is pretty much above average or slightly above average in almost every single stat for a mage. So taking a look at those numbers, we have 1359 attack, which is incredibly high for any damage dealer in the game. 4,895 health, which is pretty much garbage compared to the average 5-star in the game, but that's actually really high for a mage for the most part. Usually you get in the low to mid 4,000, so pushing 5,000 is actually really good for a mage. Speed is 110, which is slightly above where the 108 average is roughly, so that's also very good. 652 defense is very respectable. It's in line with some knights as well as a lot of warriors, and is not the highest amongst mages, but is still relatively high compared to most of the cast. 23% critical hit chance is obviously also very good because it's higher than the 15% starting chance that you get. And if you look down here, we have the imprint concentration being a 16.8% critical hit chance. So this character has almost 40% starting critical hit chance, assuming that you are going to slate her and put a lot of imprints into her, which I highly recommend that you actually do if you're going to be playing this character. Critical hit chance, if you recall in a lot of my videos, is the stat I say is the hardest for most players to hit. Starting with 40% off the rip allows you to have so much more flexibility in the character's build. Allows you to go tankier, faster, hit harder. So this is a huge boon to this character. And then the last stats are going to be critical hit damage, dual attack chance, effectiveness, and effect resistance, which are all base values. Alright, so now let's move on to the skills, starting with the S2 Insight. At the start of the first battle, Vivian gains 3 focus, and at the start of her turn, she will gain 1 focus. When she is attacked, if the expected damage is equivalent to 25 or more % of her max health, she will consume 1 of those focus to decrease the damage suffered by 50 to 70%, depending on Malagora. Additionally, after she is attacked, she will decrease her skill cooldowns by 1 turn. And then it has the clause when more than 1 damage reduction effect is granted, only the strongest effect is applied. And then finally, this effect applies only to heroes, so obviously it's to signify that this is a damage reduction passive for RTA and Arena and Guild Wars and things like that, so that you can't really use her to cheese specific PvE style content. So yeah, really insane passive. Normally we only see like 30% damage reduction on a character. or 50% in the case of a character like, say, Tempest Surin, or even like Spirit Eye Celine. Those are less so damage reduction effects, but like you can't just do more than half of their max health in one go. 70% is just really nuts. The odds of you just one-shotting this character are pretty much non-existent when you think about it. Realistically, for most people, you're going to have to chew through her entire focus bar in order to actually kill her. Or you'll just have to basically like death by 1,000 cuts her with a bunch of different little attacks that don't exceed the 25% or more of her maximum health. But all the while, every time you're attacking her, she's essentially lowering the cooldown on her S3, which we'll talk about later. So you don't really want to focus this character. So it's a pretty good passive, just because if you do get focused, she's going to throw out a ton of damage. If you aren't really focusing her, you're not going to really be able to kind of get her off the board. So it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, kind of passive. The big thing, though, is that it is, at the end of the day, a passive, which means that this character, because she is a mage, she's still going to be kind of squishy. She's vulnerable to characters like Archdemon Shadow. And then, obviously, since it's a focus mechanic, she's also very, very prone to basically being hard countered by Solitary of the Snow. If you don't know, Solitary just makes it so that focus just doesn't really become a thing ever. You don't really get any focus abilities. So those two, in my mind, are going to be pretty prominent hard counters to this character. And then obviously there's going to be Rimuru Tempest, because he literally just sidesteps almost any form of damage reduction whatsoever, because it's true damage and it just bypasses all the passives at the end of the turn. So those three off the top of my head are really bad matchups for this character just from this passive alone. Like, this is going to be one of the better survivability passives, I feel like, in the game. It gives you essentially damage if you do get focused, and if you just don't get focused, you're just still incredibly tanky overall. So really, really like this passive for sure. Now let's move on and talk about her S3, which is her ultimate skill next, which is Nature's Judgment. You acquire 1 focus upon use and 3 souls as well. It has a 6-turn cooldown, which is absolutely massive, but as you recall from Insight, the S2, it does get reduced if you get attacked at all. So that's really, really good. So it's an AoE attack that brings forth the power of nature, increases the critical hit damage of all allies for 2 turns, and recovers health before increasing the attack of the caster. Amount recovered increases proportional to the target's max health. That statement right there, the recovered health increases proportional to target's max health. That implies that Nature's Judgment is an AoE heal, but that's not guaranteed. The video doesn't show it, so it's really hard to tell. But I am under the assumption, based on this statement, that it is an AoE heal. And then we have increased attack effect can stack up to 3 times. So she has an effect similar to Blue Luluka as well as Last Rider Crow, where every time you use the S3, you get a stacking damage buff. But for those characters, it is a buff for their S3 damage. This is a buff to the entirety of the damage of Sylvan Sage Vivian. So that's a bit better. Critical hit damage buff is obviously very, very good. It's kind of rare and not really on too many good characters. Like, the most viable character that has a critical hit damage buff that I can think of off the top of my head is Flan. At least one that gives it to other characters is Flan. So yeah, overall pretty good. We have to see the multipliers on this, but this is a pretty potent S3. It does good damage because it's on a high attack character, most likely. It's an AoE heal. It gives a very coveted buff for the most part, and it amps your damage over the course of the game, and it can't really be dispelled. So really like this one. This move being AoE on a neutral element DPS means that she's probably going to have a fairly good time, I would assume, against Spectre Tenebria. So it's not like Spectre can really just like outright destroy you because of the damage reduction passive that she has on the S2, unless they just have an absolute stockpile of souls. And the combination of the S2 plus S3 leads me to believe that she's probably a pretty good matchup also against Bellion, because pretty much you'll S3, it'll trigger Elber's Ritual Sword, and that will lower the cooldown of Nature's Judgment, because Vivian will have been attacked, which means we lower our cooldowns by 1 turn. So pretty excited about like just these 2 skills alone already makes me feel pretty good about the character. So now let's talk about the last skill, which is her S1 here, which is Mana Attunement. Attacks the enemy with mana and increases the speed of the caster for 1 turn. This always feels like such a throwaway on an S1. Like, we don't know what to do, so like, let's just give it a speed buff so that way they can just get to the good part of the kit faster. Because speed is obviously king and is always good to have. So not really going to ever knock a speed buff on an S1. It helps you just get back into the fight a lot faster. We'll have to see the multipliers on this. If it's like a 1.2 multiplier with this speed, then yeah, it's pretty good. But if it's a lot lower, that's kind of worse. The most interesting thing I think about Mana Attunement is the soul burn effect. For 10 souls, it changes Mana Attunement into an AoE attack, so it's very similar. It has the same animation as Vivian's S2, Green Vivian's S2. So really interested in that, and it's why I think, again, that she's probably going to be a fairly decent neutral pick, especially if your opponent has something like Spectre Tenebria, because you can use the S3 for big damage and get a critical hit damage buff, and if somehow Vivian survives on the next turn, you can just soul burn her and just kind of like snipe the Spectre out because you'll just have so much damage. So that's where I really think she's going to shine. We are in a format right now where the primary DPS, the best DPS in the format, are Hua Young, Apocalypse Robbie, and Spectre. And Apocalypse Robbie, I think, is going to have some issues with this character because the damage reduction means you're not really going to be doing a whole heck of a lot until like later on when she's like super injured. So there's that. I don't really know. We'd have to see her damage multipliers if she can actually kill Robbie. Hua Young's going to be a pretty bad matchup because Uberius' tooth just completely sidesteps damage reduction. So based on how tanky you're built and how much attack the Hua Young has, you probably still just die. But Spectre, that's a character that's been pretty annoying because a lot of people who want to play are Bambellian, and there's not too many good characters that you can pick to counter Spectre that don't open you up really badly to both Apocalypse Robbie and Hua Young. So I think that this character is definitely a high possibility of being a very good pickup just for that reason, because it is, again, a reasonably hard to kill character with high attack stats that has AoE in a format that we desperately need a good AoE damage dealer. Like, your safest pick is Lionheart Cermia a lot of the time in this format, and Lionheart doesn't work in every match. So if your opponent, again, has Spectre, there's not too many great options for you if Bellion is banned. So I was hoping we would get an answer, and I'm hoping that this is the one. That said, until we see the multipliers, Sylvan Sage Vivian just seems good, not amazing, not game-changing. So if you're on the fence about this character, Designer Lilibet is obviously up right now. I think that she provides your account with a bit more than what Sylvan Sage Vivian is going to provide. Sylvan Sage Vivian is just going to be a safe pick DPS in my eyes, whereas Designer Lilibet is like a must-have unit to answer specific problematic openers like your Rands, your Paras, your Conqueror Liliuses, and even a character like Operator Secret, who I will have a guide for out tomorrow. That's a character that really just dunks certain matchups. And if you're struggling against characters like Hua Young, or you can't stand play against, Fallen Cecilia, then yeah, that's probably going to be another very, very good pickup for you. So I think I would, if I didn't have Designer Lilibet, or I was, thinking about picking up Operator Secret, I probably would grab them before Sylvan Sage Vivian, because they are tried and tested characters that have gone through multiple metas and are just really, really convenient to have. Sylvan Sage hasn't really proven herself, but I do think that she will be a meta character. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I think she's bad. I'm not going to tell you that I think she's like broken and she's like the next Conqueror Elias, because I don't think that's the case. I think she's going to slot in just perfectly fine, because again, we really need another good neutral pick DPS that does AoE damage, and I think this is the one that we're going to get. That's not to say that there won't be other ones in the future, which is why I'm saying I think she's a pull but not a must pull. There could very obviously be another AoE neutral DPS in the future. Like, we know that August has ML Pavel. Pavel could come out and just be a strictly better AoE DPS than Sylvan Sage Vivian is, in which case then this character kind of falls reasonably flat in the long term. As for builds on Vivian, I'm thinking that the two best ones are probably going to be either Destruction Set or Lifesteal. Lifesteal is probably the one I think most people are going to gravitate towards. Anytime historically we've had a high damage character that has some kind of survivability passive, think of your Tempest Surins, your Spirit Isolines, your Remnant Violets. Lifesteal is just kind of a natural fit for them. It's very difficult to kill them outright to begin with, so if they just keep healing, then they're just kind of like an annoying fly that you can't get rid of. So that's definitely one to consider. But for big damage right now, the buffs to Destruction Set give an unparalleled amount of stats when it comes to any of the other sets in Epic 7. So assuming you have good speed on your destruction pieces, that's probably going to end up being the best overall option as far as damage is concerned. You're probably going to see some really high damage Sage Vivians on Destruction Set in the near future. At least that's my personal take. There's nothing wrong with speed, by the way, if you don't have either Lifesteal or Destruction. I just think for those people with the really insane gear, like the best of the best Vivians, the really min-max ones, they're probably going to either be on Lifesteal or they're going to be on Destruction Set. As far as artifact choice goes, I'm really thinking that Tehagel's Ancient Book is the best option. It's just generically good. It's super obtainable. It's just, I can't see it not being like the best pick on the character. Book always feels good. It never feels terrible in any scenario. And having the ability on your Vivian to just soul burn right off the get-go for the speed buff as well as the AoE attack, and then kind of lapping back around for the S3 seems pretty good. Or vice versa, same thing. S3, get the buff to, like, you know, maybe do some damage to a Spectre Tenebria, and then when it comes back around to your turn, you just fire off a soul burn S1 and then just kill her outright with the critical hit damage buff. Both of those in my head seem really, really strong. You just have so much more gas in the tank when you are starting with 20 extra souls on this character. It just means your first 3 attacks are just going to be high impact AoE damage attacks, and that to me is very enticing. Again, I think the thing that makes Vivian interesting is that it's a hard to kill neutral pick AoE damage dealer when we don't have any of them in the format really right now. So to me, Book seems like the best choice. There are obviously going to be other damage related options you could choose, like Symbol of Unity. You could probably choose Portrait of the Saviors if you so choose. Chatty would be another pretty good option for you to choose if you're looking for some kind of artifact to help your Sage Vivian survive. It kind of synergizes really well with her S2 passive Insight, so that's another one to consider. And then if you're worried about the cooldowns being very long, something like Etika Scepter, I guess, could also be an option for you. So that's pretty much going to be it for the video. Those are my thoughts on Vivian, whether or not I think you should pull all the builds, all the abilities, things like that. So hopefully you enjoyed it. If there's anything I missed or there's anything that you feel you want to share, let me know down in the comments below. I will see you all tomorrow for how to play Operator Secret. So until then, enjoy the rest of your day. Later now.